Hey guys, it's Belton here, back for the PoEconomics episode 1 series. For today's topic, I wanted to cover the Mathil Effect, what it means, how it manifests, and why I believe it is a mistake to use it as an investment vehicle. We're then going to discuss in brief an alternative strategy of investment that I use and why it outperforms the Mathil Effect. So to begin, we need to understand two terms, which are fad investing and value investing. Investing fads are normally ones that are characterized by a temporary and excessive enthusiasm for a certain investing style, which is usually going to be unsustainable in the long term. And value investing, alternatively, is an investment strategy where items are selected that trade for less than their intrinsic values. And so we're going to seek out items with this strategy that we believe are undervalued and carry long-term value to them. So I've made a little chart here that describes the Mathil Effect. And so we'll go elaborate on this a little bit now. So to begin, we want to discuss what is the Mathil Effect. And to do that, we need to look at Mathil's playstyle himself. So Mathil is known for taking commonly overlooked unique items and using them to kill endgame content of PoE. This would be things like Uber Adziri, Shaper, basically just trying to benchmark them against what is considered to be the hardest content. Typically, they're not going to be min-maxed from a gear perspective, but they're capable and functional for a cheap budget. He has a very large viewership that often emulates him, as his builds are typically accessible on a lower budget and are therefore appealing to a casual gamer. And obviously casual gamers are going to represent a very large portion of the player base. Mathil, however, rarely sticks with his builds for an extended period of time. He instead favors moving on to new builds to benchmark his content again. To benchmark against this content again. So this results in many of his viewers doing the same thing. However, some of his viewers will choose to stick with the build, and in some cases, an item that he used that he has been previously dismissed as being completely useless will maintain a niche position within the community. So those are sort of his baseline, not assumptions, but the operating pretenses of why the Mathil Effect exists. Now, before going further, this is nothing to do with Mathil himself. This is purely the investment vehicle of the Mathil Effect. Obviously, from the strategies we're talking about here, nothing of this actually would pertain to the streamer Mathil, but rather why I believe you should not invest into this kind of investment strategy. So if we look here on the y-axis, we have price. And on the x-axis here, we have time. So I've marked down here what the Mathil Effect looks like as an investment strategy. And I've marked off some key points here. So the optimal purchasing point that we have marked off with the yellow star is going to be the best time to take advantage of the Mathil Effect if you want to make the most money out of it. The purple star represents when Mathil decides to actually use an item. The green star represents a point where you should no longer invest into this. And the blue arrow represents the peak price, and the red arrow represents the point where it will start to depreciate or when he stops playing with this item. I didn't mark it off, but you can see parallel to the green star is where that item will typically fall to an equilibrium price after the whole craze of the market has sort of calmed and gone, and that's what we would have been talking about there in that last point with maintaining a niche position within the community. So the optimal point of investment for the Mathil Effect would take place prior to its dissemination in popular consciousness. This could potentially be done by viewing his profile and tracking his character's gear to see if he makes any changes or tests off stream, or by having a personal relationship with him where he states his intentions to you ahead of time. This would sort of be like the equivalent of insider trading in real life, but of course, obviously, there's no punishment for that in PoE. So if you've got the in, go for it. Realistically, however, the majority of people who are lauding the Mathil Effect as an investment vehicle are ones who gain this information the same way as everyone else, and that's typically going to be watching it on the stream. So while this can lead to profits in the short term, as these items are typically appreciating in value very, very quickly, 1-2 day period, mostly while he's leveling or just kind of putting the build together. It also possesses poses several concerns, which can in many cases outweigh the risk from a pure risk-reward standpoint. Some of these include competition. So the strategy of investment is sort of a meme in the PoE community. Like, I hear this all the time: Belton just gets rich by doing the Mathil Effect, which again, given this we're talking about now, kind of an ironic position. But because of that sort of ubiquitous nature of it as a term, many people, kind of with the groupthink mentality, will go ahead and buy into that. So you're gonna have a lot of competition, and due to the nature of Mathil's behavior as a player, insofar as that he has short-term build use, you have very small, again, because he uses his builds for maybe like a week, 2 weeks at a time, whatever. You have a very small window in which you're able to acquire and sell these items. Moreover, they're typically very low-cost items, so they're defined by this quite often. Taking very, very small, often neglected items that are underutilized. While it may be a good % return on investment, so per item, its absolute gain will still typically be a pretty small amount. So, a 5C item might go to 30 chaos, which is again 6 times your return, which is fantastic, but it's only 25 chaos profit per unit back. So while the % returns on all of your investments are by far the most important thing to consider in a general sense and in the long term, due to the extreme competition and very narrow window in which this inflation occurs, it can often be very difficult to sell them in time to get that optimal price point. This is not to say, though, that one cannot profit off the Mathil effect if they get into the market early enough. Unique items used by Mathil still typically will have a higher price tag than they did before his initial use, as the community now has a better understanding of its potential long term. For example, a 5C item may peak at 30 chaos, which we have represented here by that blue arrow. So the 5C would be that price point at the baseline. It might peak at 30 chaos up at blue, plateau for a bit. So this will be, while he's playing it, while all of his viewers play it. But then when he stops, it might drop down to 10 chaos and then, stabilize down there again. So while, if you bought it at 5C, you'd still be doubling your profit. In the long term, though, you have to consider the opportunity cost of the time it takes to buy and sell these items. If it takes you 1 hour or 2 hours to collect all of these items and a week to sell it, there's of course, much like mapping, you want to kind of min-max the opportunity cost there. And another concept to think of is the time value of currency. I'll cover this more elaborately in another video, but essentially all that means is that, and again, the time value of currency, before I say this, is also dependent on your liquidity. So if you have a lot of liquid capital in that you can allow items to appreciate to their full value over a long-term period, then this is not as relevant because you can continue to invest. But typically, especially with people who are going to be looking into the Mathil effect as an investment vehicle, you're not going to have an infinite amount of liquid currency to invest. So this is very relevant. So the time value of currency is basically the concept that money has value given to it sort of implicitly, the earlier you get it. So for example, if somebody were to offer you 10x on the first day of the league or 100x at the last day of the league, if you were to invest that 10x on the first day of the league into a 10% return every single day, the first day would be 10x, the second day would be 11, third day would be 12.1, so on and so forth. And by the end of the league, you would have, I'm not going to do the math, but infinitely more money than you would had you just taken that lump sum. So again, if you're talking about the Mathil effect, if this period between the yellow star and that 10C is a week, you probably could have done better things with it there. Obviously, in most scenarios, this is going to be the case. There could be some outlying exceptions where it ends up, staying at a very, very high peak, and it could warrant, you doing this, or the item could move very, very quickly. But the vast majority of situations, and for the vast majority of players, you're going to be better served by going into the strategy that we do, which is called value investing. And so let me switch over the image here. So this is just a very brief and kind of, this is not something I put too much time into, but just to give a little rough look at what a value investing curve looks like, comparable to a Mathil curve. So the same thing here, we've got price on the Y and time on the X. Theoretically, so this is not with any item in mind specifically, but you notice that with this, that it's going up constantly, right? So with a value curve, you're taking items that are just going to gain value, not based on the fact that a lot of people are using them or a streamer using them, but because they have, tendencies and habits that are just going to, perpetually move them along there. And I'll explain what a few of those are in real world scenarios in a second. The theoretical curve is, again, just meant to highlight what it would look like in an ideal scenario. Realistically, though, if you're going to actually look at an item, it'll probably be something more like a red one. It might even have some troughs in it where it goes down. But for the most part, that's just to give a brief side-by-side comparison. So value investing, as I said earlier, is a strategy where we're looking for items that are based on intrinsic value and that are undervalued, and we're looking for like more of a long-term market position. And why this is fundamentally different is that if you invest at any point in this curve, so I'll bring back up the Mathil curve for a second. If you invest buy the Mathil items at the red arrow, you're going to lose money. Whereas typically with value invested items, it doesn't matter where you get into them because they're just always gaining, obviously there's going to be an optimal investment point, but you don't have that risk because since they don't suffer from the whims of an individual player as the basis for their value, you can get involved in these sorts of items at any point in the league. And just to give an example of that, this past league, I actually missed the first 27 days of the league. So, most people operate under the assumption that you need to make like a ton of currency right off the beginning. And while it certainly does help, of course, it's not the case if you can figure out some clever things to go into. So examples that I put of this here are like jewels, league-related items. So things like splinters, league stones, prophecies, whatever. Helmet enchants, specifically T1 helmet enchants. For example, a +2 barrage hubris. When I first started it, which again was day 27, was 2x alts. They're now 12x, and they have never gone down again. Things like luxury corruption, so +1 arrow and a signal fire as opposed to just using a normal signal fire. Again, I can elaborate on these ones a little bit, I guess, here. I didn't want to spend too much time on this, but jewels, for example, at the beginning of a league, jewels typically are going to be used by people closer to level 90 in their build. They're going to get, their keystones, their notables. And so jewels, again, just by virtue of the fact that they come in later levels, typically, are not going to be used till that point. Plus, they're going to be in a lot of high supply at the beginning of a league because jewels don't have item level requirements, right? The mods on jewels can all be rolled at item level 1, which means they're going to be appearing as soon as the league starts. So you can get a perfect 4-mod jewel dropping from day 1 of a league, but most people aren't going to have access to that until much later in their leveling curve. Not only that, but player behavior habits would generally tell us that people are going to invest into their build enabling uniques, their ES gear, their 6 links, their gems, whatever, before they really try to min-max these jewels. So there's an example there. League related items, especially in new leagues. So like this league, it was league stones. They're commonly misunderstood at the beginning of the league. Like, people don't know how to best utilize them yet, and a lot of the times they're not aware of the maximum potential of something. And the best case I can think of is from the Dark Shrines League with the Seek the Apex mod. This is probably a reference a lot of you won't catch because this was a couple of years ago. But again, just with this current league here with League Stones, there were things like the Chayula Splinters, the certain talisman ones, the Essence League Stone of Abundant Essence League Stone of Echoes. There's lots of them that people just don't really realize what's available, and because of that, they're often very, very cheap. And then as more and more people learn about them, they get more and more expensive, especially because there's impermanence typically to league items. In that they are often not going to be implemented into the full game as they exist in the league. So people are worried and want to take advantage of them. And then also they often have challenges or achievements attached to them as well, which causes people to pay more for them as the league comes to an end. Corruptions and stuff like that are, again, with like +1 arrow, +1 curse, +1 max res, a lot of things like that. Those are more luxury items that people are just going to get once they have more currency, like disposable currency. But in a lot of cases, they're not build enabling or necessary per se. And then Helm enchants are similar in that at the beginning, everyone at the beginning of the league has to kill Uber Isro at least once. So there's a lot of people who are going to have helmet enchants. And obviously a lot of cases, T1 builds, like the builds that are going to use a +2 Barrage Hubris, are going to be more expensive. So they're not going to really gain popularity until later in the league. But even aside from that, like a lot of the helmet enchants, just like people aren't going to... there's going to be a higher supply than there is a demand because people aren't going to pay 12x at the beginning of a league just because of what the relative increases they can have to their character are. So those are just things, again, that are always pretty much going to increase. There's lots of examples of this, but I just wanted to give you a few of them. So anyways, that was, again, the comparison between value investing, which I'm going to bring up again in future videos in a much more sort of thorough and applicable sense. The big thing here was just to talk about the Mathil effect and maybe change people's perspective on this, and maybe think twice about it in the future. This isn't to say you can't make money off this. Of course, there's always going to be circumstances in which you can take advantage. But, just think these things through, and hopefully, this can help you out in the future. And hopefully you learned something. So I'll see you guys again soon, and take care.